beneath the relentless Egyptian sun, where golden sands stretch endlessly toward horizons shimmering with heat. The pyramids of Giza stand as eternal sentinels of human ambition, their limestone faces weathered by 45 centuries of wind and time, yet still commanding the landscape with an authority that renders even the most cynical modern observer speechless with wonder. For these are not merely monuments, but riddles carved in stone, each block a question, each chamber a mystery that has haunted archaeologists, engineers, historians, and dreamers since the first travelers from distant lands gazed upon them and wondered how such impossible structures could have been raised by human hands in an age before machinery, before computers, before even the wheel was common in this part of the world, and now, in this remarkable age of technological innovation, when cosmic rays can peer through solid rock and ground-penetrating radar can reveal what lies buried beneath desert floors, we are finally beginning to answer questions that have persisted for millennia, discoveries so profound that they are rewriting our understanding not just of ancient Egypt, but of human civilization itself, revealing engineering sophistication that challenges our assumptions about the capabilities of our ancestors, and suggesting that beneath the sand-swept plateau of Giza lies far more than anyone had previously imagined. A hidden world of tunnels, chambers, and structures that may have served purposes we are only beginning to comprehend. The story begins, as many great archaeological narratives do, with a technology that sounds more like science fiction than science fact. For who could have imagined that particles raining down from outer space, created when cosmic rays collide with Earth's atmosphere, could become the key to unlocking secrets sealed within limestone and granite for thousands of years? Yet, this is precisely what has happened through the development of muon tomography, a revolutionary imaging technique that uses these naturally occurring subatomic particles to create three-dimensional maps of the pyramid's interior structure without drilling a single hole or removing a single stone, much as X-rays can reveal the bones within our bodies. Muons can penetrate the massive stone bulk of the pyramids and reveal what lies hidden within. And it was this technology, deployed by the International Scan Pyramids project, beginning in 2015, that led to one of the most significant discoveries in pyramid research in over a century: the detection of a massive void within the Great Pyramid of Khufu, a space comparable in size to the Grand Gallery itself, that enormous ascending corridor that has awed visitors for generations. Yet this newly discovered void appears to have no known function, no visible entrance, no ancient texts that mention its existence, and its very presence raises profound questions about what the builders of this monument were truly trying to achieve. Whether this space was intentional or accidental, whether it served some structural purpose we don't yet understand, or whether it might contain treasures or knowledge that have remained untouched since the pyramid was sealed. And while some researchers initially expressed skepticism, additional scans using different types of detectors placed in different locations have confirmed the void's existence beyond reasonable doubt, though accessing it remains a challenge that archaeologists approach with extreme caution. For the pyramid itself is a treasure that must be protected, and any attempt to reach this hidden space must be done in ways that cause no damage to the monument itself, which is why researchers are currently exploring the possibility of using miniature robots equipped with cameras to navigate existing shafts and cracks in the stonework, hoping to find a way to peek into this mysterious chamber without creating new passages through the ancient structure. But the Great Pyramid's hidden void is far from the only recent discovery that has electrified the archaeological community. For in 2025, researchers working with the Pyramid of Menkaure, the smallest of the three main pyramids at Giza, announced that their scans had revealed not one, but two previously unknown air-filled voids within the structure, using a combination of electrical resistivity tomography, ground-penetrating radar, and ultrasonic testing to map what appears to be concealed spaces behind the pyramid's granite facade. And these discoveries have reignited an old mystery that has puzzled Egyptologists for more than a century: the question of whether Menkaure's pyramid, like its larger neighbors, might have a second entrance on its northern face. For historical records suggest that such an entrance once existed, but if it did, it was lost long ago, buried beneath rubble, or sealed so effectively that no trace of it has been found in modern times. And these newly detected voids are positioned in exactly the location where such an entrance might be expected to exist, raising tantalizing possibilities about what might be discovered if these spaces can be safely explored. Whether they might lead to undiscovered chambers or corridors, or whether they are simply structural features, pockets of space created to reduce the immense weight pressing down on the chambers below, a technique that ancient Egyptian engineers certainly understood and employed in other pyramids. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond the excitement of finding hidden chambers, for they are forcing archaeologists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about how and why the pyramids were built. And nowhere is this more evident than in the ongoing debate about construction methods, a topic that has generated countless theories over the years. Some based on careful analysis of archaeological evidence, others veering into the realm of pseudoscience and fantasy, but recent research is providing real answers grounded in physics, engineering, analysis, and material science. And these answers are in many ways more impressive than the wildest speculation, for they reveal that the ancient Egyptians possessed sophisticated knowledge of mechanics, logistics, and project management that allowed them to accomplish feats that even modern construction firms would find challenging, transporting millions of limestone blocks from quarries several kilometers away. Each block weighing, on average, 2.5 tons, some much more, and then raising these enormous stones to heights of more than 140 meters in the case of the Great Pyramid. All without the benefit of iron tools, wheeled vehicles capable of carrying such loads across desert sand, or any form of mechanical power other than human and animal muscle. Yet they did it, and they did it with such precision that the base of the Great Pyramid, covering more than 13 acres, is level to within just a few centimeters. And the sides are aligned to the cardinal directions, with an accuracy that would be impressive even with modern surveying equipment, demonstrating a command of geometry and astronomy that speaks to a level of education and training among the workforce that contradicts old notions of these structures being built by masses of unskilled slaves, driven by whips and fear. Indeed, one of the most important shifts in our understanding of the pyramids has come not from studying the monuments themselves, but from excavating the settlements where the workers lived. And here, the archaeological evidence is unambiguous and revolutionary. For the discovery of the workers' village at Giza, first identified in the 1982 and systematically excavated over subsequent decades, has revealed that the pyramid builders were not slaves at all, at least not in the sense that word is commonly understood, but rather skilled laborers and craftsmen who were well-fed, provided with medical care, and accorded considerable respect in death, their tombs found in close proximity to the pyramids they built, a privilege that would never have been granted to mere slaves. An analysis of their remains shows that these were not people who died of malnutrition or were worked to death under brutal conditions, but rather individuals who received treatment for injuries, including complex surgeries, and who consumed a diet rich in protein, including substantial quantities of beef, which was expensive and prestigious food in ancient Egypt, the remains of which were found in enormous quantities in the settlement's food preparation areas, suggesting that the workers were fed like royalty, a logistical undertaking that in itself speaks to the organizational sophistication of the pyramid building enterprise for feeding thousands of workers daily, ensuring they had adequate housing, medical care, and all the tools and materials they needed required a bureaucracy and supply chain management that would not look out of place in a modern construction project. The village itself, sprawling across more than 7 hectares near the Giza Plateau, was purpose-built to house this workforce, with evidence of bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves of bread daily, fisheries, copper workshops for tool manufacture and repair, and living quarters organized in ways that suggest different groups of workers, possibly organized by their home regions or by their specific skills, lived in distinct areas of the settlement. And among the most fascinating finds are the written records, pieces of pottery and fragments of papyrus bearing notes about deliveries of supplies, work assignments, and even complaints about working conditions, giving us glimpses into the daily concerns and administrative details of a massive construction project undertaken 4,500 years ago, including the famous Diary of Merer, an inspector and overseer whose papyrus logbook, discovered at the ancient port of Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast and dated to the reign of Khufu, provides the only first-hand account we have from someone actually involved in the Great Pyramid's construction, describing how he and his team of approximately 200 men transported limestone blocks from the quarries at Tura, south of modern Cairo, to the pyramid construction site, using boats to move the heavy stones along the Nile and through a system of canals during the annual inundation when the river flooded and water reached much closer to the plateau than it does today, solving one of the great logistical puzzles of how millions of tons of stone were moved across what is now desert. The answer being that for part of the year it wasn't desert at all, but accessible by water, allowing the Egyptians to use boats and barges, the most efficient means of heavy transport available in the ancient world, to bring materials right to the construction site. This brings us to the question that has perhaps generated more debate, speculation, and wild theorizing than any other aspect of the pyramids: the question of precisely how blocks weighing several tons each were raised to such great heights. And while various ramp theories have been proposed and debated for decades, recent analysis suggests that the answer may be more complex than a single method. With different techniques used at different stages of construction and for different purposes, the most widely accepted theory involves the use of external ramps that would have been built alongside the pyramid, rising at a gradual slope of perhaps 5 to 10 degrees, which would have been manageable for teams of workers hauling blocks on wooden sledges, and experimental archaeology, including actual attempts to move large stone blocks using ancient methods, has demonstrated that such sledges, when pulled across sand that has been properly wetted to increase its firmness and reduce friction, can indeed be moved by teams of workers, with the optimal water content being about 5%. Information that ancient Egyptian artwork seems to confirm, showing workers pouring water in front of sledges, carrying large statues, suggesting this was a known technique, and calculations based on the workforce size estimates from the workers' village, combined with reasonable assumptions about how much weight a team of men could move and how long it would take, demonstrate that the Great Pyramid could indeed have been built in the approximately 20 years that ancient historians attribute to its construction, requiring the placement of roughly one block every few minutes during daylight hours, which sounds impossible until you realize that with multiple work gangs operating simultaneously on different parts of the structure, and with efficient organization and logistics, such a pace becomes achievable, though it would have required extraordinary coordination and planning. Yet external ramps, while solving some problems, create others, particularly as the pyramid rises higher and higher, for the ramp would need to be extended and raised continuously, and by the time the pyramid reached its full height, the ramp would have been enormous, containing possibly more material than the pyramid itself. And while there is evidence that such ramps were used, particularly in the early stages of construction, some researchers have proposed that internal ramps spiraling up through the pyramid structure might have been used for the upper portions, and intriguing evidence for this comes from the study of the Great Pyramid's internal structure, where minute thermal variations and density differences detected by modern scanning technologies suggest the presence of features that could be remnants of such ramps, later filled in and sealed, and this theory gained support from the discovery at a nearby pyramid complex of what appears to be an internal ramp preserved in the structure, demonstrating that Egyptian engineers did indeed use this technique, at least in some cases. Though whether it was employed on the grandest pyramid of all remains a subject of ongoing research and debate. Even more revolutionary is the recent proposal, based on a detailed study of the Great Pyramid's internal passages and the discovery of a complex system of channels beneath and around the structure, that the ancient engineers may have employed hydraulic systems, using water not just to lubricate sledges, but as an actual lifting mechanism. A theory that might sound far-fetched, UT is grounded in evidence, including the presence of what appears to be a dry moat surrounding the pyramid. a feature that has puzzled archaeologists for years, as it seems to serve no defensive purpose. But if it were actually part of a water management system, perhaps feeding water into the structure through channels cut in the rock beneath the pyramid's foundation, then it would make sense as part of a sophisticated hydraulic installation. And the theory proposes that water pressure could have been used to operate floats or elevators that lifted heavy blocks through vertical shafts, a technique that would have required profound understanding of hydraulic engineering, but was certainly within the capabilities of a civilization that built elaborate irrigation systems throughout the Nile Valley. And while this theory remains controversial and is still being tested and debated, it represents the kind of innovative thinking that recent discoveries have encouraged, pushing researchers to consider that the ancient Egyptians may have been even more technologically sophisticated than we previously believed, particularly in their understanding of practical physics and their ability to harness natural forces for construction purposes. The question of why these enormous monuments were built is in some ways easier to answer than how, for they were clearly funerary monuments, tombs designed to house the bodies of pharaohs and ease their journey to the afterlife. Yet this simple answer conceals layers of religious belief, political calculation, and cultural meaning that are only partial. Lee understood even after more than a century of Egyptological research. For the pyramid was never just a tomb, but a complete complex that included temples, causeways, subsidiary pyramids for queens, and everything the pharaoh would need in the afterlife, all designed according to precise religious specifications that aligned the structure with cosmic forces and solar cycles. For the pyramids were called Akhet, meaning horizon or place where the sun rises, connecting the deceased pharaoh with Ra, the sun god, and ensuring his resurrection each day along with the sun. And the very shape of the pyramid, with its 4 triangular sides meeting at a point, may represent the sacred Benben stone, the primordial mound that emerged from the waters of chaos at the creation of the world, according to Egyptian mythology. Or maybe a stylized representation of the sun's rays breaking through clouds, linking the pharaoh with solar power. Though these interpretations remain speculative, based on religious texts that are themselves often cryptic and multi-layered in meaning. And what is certain is that the investment of resources, labor, and planning that went into these monuments represents not just the power of the pharaoh, but the organization of the entire Egyptian state, the ability to mobilize and sustain a massive workforce, to extract and transport resources from across the country, to feed and house thousands of workers, all of which required a functioning bureaucracy, a system of writing and record keeping, agricultural surpluses sufficient to support non-farming workers, and the mathematical and engineering knowledge to design and execute the construction, making the pyramids not just monuments to individual kings, but demonstrations of state power and organizational capacity, showing both the pharaoh's subjects and any foreign powers who might see these structures that Egypt was wealthy, organized, and capable of accomplishments that no other nation could match. The pyramids we see today, bare limestone, stripped of most of their facing stones, golden tan under the desert sun, bear little resemblance to how they appeared when first completed, for they were originally covered with smooth white limestone casing stones, cut with such precision that the joints between them were barely visible, creating surfaces so smooth and reflective that the pyramids would have gleamed brilliantly in the sunlight, visible for miles across the desert, and the very apex of the Great Pyramid was capped with a pyramidion that ancient sources suggest may have been covered with gold or electrum, an alloy of gold and silver, making the tip flash like a star. And some researchers have suggested that the reflective surfaces might have served purposes beyond the aesthetic and symbolic, perhaps functioning as landmarks for navigation or even as part of a system for signaling across distances, though this remains speculative. But what is certain is that the removal of these casing stones over the centuries, taken to build mosques and palaces in Cairo after a devastating earthquake in the 14th century loosened many of them, has robbed us of the ability to see the pyramids as their builders intended, though a few casing stones remain in place at the top of Khafre's pyramid and at the base of Menkaure's, giving us glimpses of that original brilliance. And recent conservation efforts have focused not on replacing these stones, which would be impractical and arguably inappropriate, but on protecting and stabilizing what remains, ensuring that these monuments will endure for future generations to study and wonder at. Among the most extraordinary artifacts associated with the pyramids are the so-called solar boats, full-size ancient Egyptian vessels that were buried in pits near the pyramids, apparently intended to carry the pharaoh on his journey through the afterlife, particularly the journey across the sky with the sun god. And the most complete of these is the Khufu ship, discovered in 1954, sealed in a pit on the south side of the Great Pyramid, dismantled into 1,224 pieces, but preserved in such excellent condition that it could be reassembled, a process that took more than 10 years and required extraordinary skill and patience, for the ancient shipwrights had used sophisticated joinery techniques, with planks sewn together with rope rather than nailed, allowing the hull to flex slightly in response to stresses, a technique that made these vessels remarkably seaworthy. And indeed, analysis of the Khufu ship shows evidence that it was actually used on water before being buried. Not just a ceremonial model, but a real working vessel that may have been used in the pharaoh's funeral procession, carrying his body from the east bank of the Nile to the pyramid site on the west bank, following the path of the setting sun into the realm of the dead. And this beautifully preserved ship, measuring 43 meters in length, constructed entirely of cedar wood imported from Lebanon, is now one of the treasures of the Grand Egyptian Museum, having been painstakingly moved from its original location near the pyramid to this new state-of-the-art facility where it can be better protected and displayed. And remarkably, a second boat pit was discovered near the first, also sealed and containing another dismantled vessel, which is currently being excavated and studied using techniques far more sophisticated than were available when the first ship was discovered, including three-dimensional laser scanning of every piece before it is moved, creating a digital record that will aid in eventual reconstruction and also preserve information about exactly how the boat was originally disassembled and packed into its pit. The Plateau of Giza, however, is just one of many pyramid sites scattered along the Nile Valley. For the pyramid building tradition spans several dynasties and hundreds of years, evolving from the step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, built around 2630 BCE, and considered the world's oldest large-scale stone structure, designed by the legendary architect Imhotep, who was later deified for his accomplishments through the experimental pyramids of the 4th dynasty, including the bent pyramid at Dahshur, which famously changes angle partway up, possibly due to structural concerns that led the builders to reduce the slope to prevent collapse, giving it its distinctive bent appearance and making it one of the most unusual pyramids ever constructed, and then progressing to the great smooth-sided pyramids of Giza that represent the pinnacle of the pyramid building tradition, after which the monuments generally became smaller and less ambitiously engineered, though they continued to be built for centuries. And each of these sites has contributed to our understanding of how pyramid construction techniques evolved and how Egyptian religious and political ideology changed over time, with recent excavations at Saqqara, which was used as a burial ground for over 3,000 years, producing an astonishing array of discoveries, including sealed coffins containing mummies in remarkably good condition, some covered in gold, found in shafts that had remained untouched since antiquity. And these finds continue to be made, with new tombs and shafts being discovered regularly as excavation continues in areas that have never been properly explored, reminding us that despite more than a century of modern archaeology in Egypt, there is still much to be found, many questions to be answered, and mysteries to be solved. The bent pyramid at Dahshur deserves special attention, for after being closed to visitors for more than 50 years, it was reopened in 2019 following extensive restoration work, allowing tourists to venture down the narrow 79-meter tunnel from the northern entrance deep into the pyramid's interior, experiencing something that very few people had been able to do in modern times. And the reopening of this monument was celebrated not just as a victory for conservation and tourism, but as an opportunity for researchers to study the structure more thoroughly, For the bent pyramid is unique among major pyramids in that it retains much of its original smooth limestone casing, making it the best preserved example of what all the pyramids originally looked like. And its internal structure is also unusual, with two separate entrance passages leading to two separate burial chambers, suggesting that the building's plan may have been altered during construction, possibly reflecting changing religious ideas about the afterlife, or perhaps simply practical adjustments made necessary by structural problems encountered during building. And the debate continues among Egyptologists about whether the pyramid was ever actually used as a burial site, for no sarcophagus has been found within it, though this might simply mean that it was robbed in antiquity and any sarcophagus removed or destroyed, a fate that befell most pyramids long before archaeologists arrived to study them. For the pyramids have been targets for treasure hunters for thousands of years, likely raided in their cant, and stolen during periods of political instability in ancient Egyptian history. And by the time of the Arab conquest in the 7th century CE, the pyramids were already ancient mysteries, their original purposes partly forgotten, their treasures long since plundered, which is why the discovery of Tutankhamun's nearly intact tomb in the Valley of the Kings in 1922 was so extraordinary, not because Tutankhamun himself was a particularly important pharaoh, but because his tomb had escaped the robbers and thus preserved a relatively complete assemblage of grave goods, giving us a glimpse of what burial assemblages looked like before plundering. And if a minor pharaoh like Tutankhamun had such wealth buried with him, we can only imagine what must have been placed in the tombs of great pyramid builders like Khufu and Khafre, treasures that are now lost forever, melted down, dispersed, or destroyed centuries ago. Yet, the mysteries of the pyramids extend beyond their physical structure to encompass questions of astronomical alignment and mathematical encoding that have fascinated researchers for decades. For the precision with which these monuments were oriented to, the cardinal directions suggest knowledge of astronomical observation techniques far more sophisticated than many people assume ancient civilizations possessed. And while some of the more extreme claims about astronomical alignments have been debunked or shown to be exaggerated, there is no denying that the builders paid careful attention to celestial phenomena, using the stars to establish true north with remarkable accuracy, a feat accomplished by observing the rotation of circumpolar stars around the north celestial pole and using geometric methods to bisect the arc of their apparent movement, establishing a meridian line that could then be used to align the pyramid's sides. And this required not just astronomical knowledge, but patience and precision, for the observations would need to be conducted over multiple nights and the results carefully recorded and calculated, demonstrating once again that the pyramid builders were not simple laborers, but skilled specialists, including astronomers and mathematicians whose expertise was essential to the project's success. And within the Great Pyramid itself, the narrow shafts that extend from the King's Chamber and Queen's Chamber, long thought to be ventilation shafts, though they don't actually connect to the exterior, have been shown to align with specific stars that held religious significance in ancient Egyptian cosmology, with a southern shaft from the King's Chamber pointing toward Orion's belt, which the Egyptians associated with Osiris, god of the afterlife, while the northern shaft pointed toward what were then the circumpolar stars, the imperishable stars that never set below the horizon and were associated with eternal life, suggesting that these shafts served a ritual rather than practical purpose, perhaps conceived as pathways for the pharaoh's spirit to ascend to the stars and join the gods. Though this interpretation, while widely accepted, remains a matter of scholarly debate, and the famous Orion correlation theory, which proposes that the three pyramids of Giza were positioned to mirror the three stars of Orion's belt, while intriguing and popular in certain circles, has been challenged by Egyptologists who point out that the correlation is not as precise as proponents claim, and that there is no textual evidence from ancient Egypt supporting such an interpretation. Yet the debate itself demonstrates how the pyramids continue to inspire new theories and interpretations, each generation of researchers bringing new tools and perspectives to bear on these ancient monuments, sometimes confirming traditional understandings, sometimes overturning them, always adding layers of complexity to our understanding of what these structures meant to their builders and what they can tell us about ancient Egyptian civilization. The mathematical knowledge encoded in the pyramids is equally impressive and has been the subject of extensive analysis, for the Great Pyramid's dimensions appear to incorporate several important mathematical constants, including an approximation of pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, which appears in the relationship between the pyramid's perimeter and its height, though whether this was intentional or a consequence of the construction methods used, specifically the Siket system of measuring slope, remains debated, for the Siket was a practical unit used by Egyptian builders, defining the horizontal distance covered for each cubit of vertical rise, and a sect of 5.5 palms, which is what the Great Pyramid appears to use, naturally produces a slope t. Hat, when extended, creates proportions that approximate pi. So the question becomes whether the builders understood they were incorporating this mathematical constant, or whether they arrived at it through empirical methods without necessarily grasping its deeper mathematical significance. And similar questions arise regarding the golden ratio phi, which some researchers claim to find in the pyramid's proportions, though again, mainstream Egyptologists tend to be skeptical of such claims, noting that the Egyptians' own mathematical texts, including the famous Rhind mathematical papyrus and the Moscow mathematical papyrus, show that they used practical arithmetic and geometric methods well suited to construction and land surveying, but do not demonstrate knowledge of abstract mathematical concepts like irrational numbers, yet they clearly could calculate areas and volumes with impressive accuracy, including the volume of pyramids using the formula that the volume equals 1/3 the base area multiplied by the height, a formula still taught in schools today. And they could solve practical problems involving slopes, angles, and proportions using methods that, while different from modern mathematics in their notation and conceptual framework, were fully adequate for designing and constructing monuments of extraordinary complexity and precision. And the fact that modern scholars can look at these structures and find sophisticated mathematics embedded in them, whether intentionally placed there or not, speaks to the enduring genius of their design and the skill of those who executed them. The very foundation upon which the pyramids rest demonstrates engineering sophistication that deserves more recognition than it typically receives. For the Giza Plateau was not simply a convenient flat space where pyramids could be built, but was carefully chosen and prepared to provide a stable platform for these massive structures. The builders selecting this particular location because the underlying limestone bedrock was solid and homogeneous, capable of supporting millions of tons of weight without settling or shifting, which would have been catastrophic for structures whose stability depended on maintaining precise geometric relationships between their parts. And before construction could begin, the site had to be leveled with extraordinary accuracy, a feat accomplished by cutting channels into the bedrock and filling them with water, creating a level reference surface that could be used to guide the cutting of the remaining stone, to create a perfectly horizontal platform. And in some areas, the builders actually incorporated natural bedrock outcrops into the pyramid structure itself, building around and over them rather than removing them, a practice that saved enormous amounts of labor while also potentially contributing to the structure's stability. And the precision of this foundation work is evident in measurements showing that the base of the Great Pyramid varies from perfectly level by no more than 2 centimeters over a distance of more than 230 meters. An achievement that would be impressive even with modern laser leveling equipment, and is absolutely remarkable for a project undertaken 4,500 years ago with nothing more than water, string, and careful observation, demonstrating that the ancient engineers understood principles of surveying and construction that would not be formally codified and taught in engineering schools for thousands of years, but which they had clearly mastered through empirical experience and practical application, building up a body of knowledge that was passed down from one generation of master builders to the next, refined and improved with each successive project, until it reached the extraordinary level of sophistication evident at Giza. Yet for all their magnificence and the skill that went into creating them, The pyramids today face threats that their builders could never have imagined, environmental challenges that arise from modern industrial civilization and climate change. And conserving these ancient monuments for future generations has become an urgent priority for Egyptian authorities and international heritage organizations. For the pollution from Cairo, which has grown into a sprawling megalopolis of more than 20 million people, envelops the Giza Plateau in smog that accelerates the chemical weathering of the limestone, while the vibrations from nearby traffic and construction, the pressure from millions of tourists annually, the rising groundwater levels caused by changes in the Nile's flood patterns since the construction of the Aswan High Dam, and even the encroachment of urban development that has brought buildings to the very edge of the archaeological zone, all combine to place stress on monuments that have already stood for millennia, but which are not indestructible. And the challenges of preservation are complicated by the need to balance conservation with access, for the pyramids are not just archaeological treasures, but economic assets. Drawing tourists from around the world and generating revenue essential to Egypt's economy, yet allowing unlimited access inevitably causes damage from the moisture and carbon dioxide that visitors exhale in enclosed spaces, which promotes limestone decay and encourages microbiological growth to the physical wear on ancient stones, from millions of footsteps to the risk of vandalism and theft, all of which must be managed through careful monitoring, controlled access, use of replica tombs for heavily visited sites while protecting fragile originals, and investment in conservation technologies ranging from advanced monitoring systems that track environmental conditions in real time to chemical treatments that can stabilize deteriorating stone, though such treatments must be carefully evaluated to ensure they don't cause more harm than good, for some past restoration efforts undertaken with the best of intentions, but inadequate understanding of the materials and processes involved, actually accelerated decay by introducing salts and other compounds that damage the ancient limestone, teaching conservators hard lessons about the importance of research and testing before implementing preservation strategies on irreplaceable monuments. And today's conservation efforts benefit from sophisticated scientific analysis using techniques that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations of archaeologists, from scanning electron microscopy to reveal the microstructure of deteriorating stone, to environmental modeling that predicts how climate change will affect these monuments over the coming decades, allowing proactive measures to be developed and implemented before damage becomes irreversible. The Red Pyramid at Dashur, standing approximately 1 kilometer north of its bent sibling, represents the successful culmination of Pharaoh Sneferu's pyramid building experiments, for after the problems encountered with the bent, pyramid forced a mid-construction change in angle. The architects applied their hard-won lessons to create what is considered Egypt's first true smooth-sided pyramid, and while it may lack the fame of the Giza pyramids built by Sneferu's successors, it is in many ways more interesting archaeologically, for unlike the more famous monuments, the Red Pyramid retains much of its original appearance and allows visitors to explore its interior chambers, descending a long, steep passage that requires visitors to crouch or even crawl in places, an uncomfortable journey that culminates in a series of 3 chambers built using the corbelling technique, where each successive course of stone projects slightly inward from the one below, eventually meeting at the top to form a pointed vault, a construction method that distributes weight away from the center and was used by ancient builders before they mastered the true arch, and these chambers are remarkably well preserved, with the ancient tool marks still visible on the stone surfaces, and the pyramid gets its modern name from the reddish hue of the limestone used in its construction, which becomes particularly vivid at sunset when the entire structure seems to glow with an inner fire. And recent analysis of the pyramid has revealed that it may contain additional chambers that have not yet been explored, detected through microgravity surveys and ground-penetrating radar. Though accessing these potential chambers would require careful archaeological work to ensure no damage is done to the structure and the very existence of such chambers, if confirmed, would raise fascinating questions about their purpose, whether they are simply structural features, perhaps designed to reduce the weight pressing on lower chambers, or whether they might have served some ritual purpose, or even, tantalizing though the possibility seems remote, whether they might contain burial goods or other artifacts that escaped the attention of ancient tomb robbers who left evidence of their presence in the known chambers. For the pyramid's burial chamber, while impressive in its architectural features, was found empty when modern archaeologists first explored it. Though whether this is because Snefru was never buried there, or because he was buried there but the tomb was subsequently robbed, or because he was buried there and his mummy moved to another location during antiquity, remains an unresolved mystery, with different Egyptologists favoring different theories based on their interpretation of the available evidence, which is frustratingly incomplete, as is so often the case when dealing with monuments that are thousands of years old and have been subject to countless interventions, both ancient and modern, over the centuries. The Great Sphinx of Giza, that enigmatic creature with the body of a lion and the head of a human, crouching at the edge of the plateau as if standing eternal guard over the pyramids, presents its own set of mysteries and controversies that rival even those of the pyramids themselves. For while it is generally accepted by mainstream Egyptology that the Sphinx was carved during the reign of Khafre, the Fa, Rao, associated with the second pyramid at Giza, from the bedrock of the plateau itself, leaving the enormous trench or enclosure that surrounds it, there are dissident voices who argue that the weathering patterns on the Sphinx and its enclosure walls suggest exposure to heavy rainfall over extended periods, which would place its construction far earlier than the traditional date of around 2500 BCE. Perhaps even to a period before the beginning of ancient Egyptian civilization as we know it. And this controversial water erosion hypothesis, proposed most famously by geologist Robert Schoch and popularized by author Graham Hancock, has become one of the most hotly debated topics in alternative archaeology. Though it should be noted that the overwhelming consensus among geologists who have studied the Sphinx is that the weathering can be adequately explained by known processes, including wind erosion, chemical weathering from moisture wicking up from the water table, and periods when the Sphinx was buried in sand that retained moisture and accelerated decay, without requiring the monument to be thousands of years older than the pyramids. Yet, the debate continues, fueled by the undeniable fact that the Sphinx does show severe weathering that has required multiple restoration efforts over the millennia, including campaigns during the New Kingdom, when it was already ancient, and modern efforts that have struggled to find methods of stabilization that don't cause additional damage, and the monument's face, which may or may not represent Khafre, though the resemblance to statues of that pharaoh is suggestive, has been worn smooth by wind and weather, robbed of most of its detail, and famously damaged when its nose was broken off, an act of vandalism that occurred sometime before the 15th century according to historical accounts. Though popular mythology incorrectly blames Napoleon's troops, and recent scanning and analysis of the Sphinx has revealed that it may have undergone multiple modifications in antiquity, possibly being recarved or reshaped, adding yet another layer of mystery to this already enigmatic monument that has captured human imagination for thousands of years. The religious and spiritual significance of the pyramids extends far beyond their function as tombs, for they were integral to a complex system of beliefs about death, resurrection, and the afterlife that formed the very foundation of ancient Egyptian civilization. And nowhere is this more evident than in the pyramid texts, the oldest known religious literature in the world, inscribed on the walls of the chambers and corridors within the Pyramid of Unas at Saqqara, and subsequently in several other pyramids of the late Old Kingdom. These spells, utterances, and ritual instructions, carved in columns of hieroglyphic text that still retain traces of their original blue-green paint, were intended to ensure the safe passage of the deceased pharaoh through the dangers of the underworld and his successful resurrection among the gods, describing a cosmic journey in which the king ascends to the sky, joins the circumpolar stars that never set, sails with the sun god Ra across the heavens, and is transformed into an Akh, a transfigured spirit possessing power and knowledge. And the texts reveal a sophisticated theology that understood the cosmos as a unified system in which the earthly realm, the sky, and the underworld were interconnected, with the pharaoh serving as the crucial link between the human and divine. And reading these texts today, we can glimpse the profound concerns and hopes of a civilization that invested enormous resources in ensuring the immortality of their kings, believing that the well-being of the entire nation depended on the successful transformation of the dead pharaoh into a god, and the pyramid itself was conceived as a machine for resurrection. Its every element, from the orientation to the stars to the arrangement of chambers and passages, designed to facilitate this cosmic transformation, making it not just a tomb, but a religious instrument of tremendous power and complexity. The tools and technologies available to the ancient Egyptian builders have been the subject of much speculation and some misconceptions. For while it is true that they did not possess iron tools during the Pyramid Age, working instead with copper implements and stone tools, this does not mean they were technologically primitive. And recent experimental archaeology, in which researchers have attempted to replicate ancient construction techniques using period-appropriate tools, has demonstrated that copper chisels, when used in combination with abrasive quartz, sand, and dolerite hammers, can indeed cut limestone with surprising efficiency, particularly when the copper is arsenical copper, an alloy containing small amounts of arsenic that makes it harder and more durable than pure copper. An analysis of actual tools recovered from pyramid building sites has confirmed that this is precisely what the Egyptians used. And for harder stones, like granite, they employed a variety of techniques, including pounding with dolerite balls, each weighing several kilograms, that could fracture and pulverize even the hardest stone through repeated impacts, and drilling using copper tubes charged with abrasive sand, a technique that has been verified through examination of ancient drill holes that show the characteristic circular marks left by this method, and sawing using copper blades, again with sand as the actual cutting agent, copper serving merely as the vehicle to hold and direct the abrasive material. And these techniques, while labor-intensive and time-consuming by modern standards, are fully adequate for the work the Egyptians needed to accomplish and the precision they achieved, with some joints between stone blocks so tight that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them, speaks not to the use of lost super technologies, but to the patience, skill, and quality control of highly trained craftsmen who took pride in their work and understood that they were creating monuments for eternity, and the organizational systems that coordinated the quarrying, transportation, and placement of millions of stone blocks, ensuring that each arrived at the right place at the right time and that the work proceeded according to plan despite the involvement of thousands of workers, represents a technological achievement in itself, even if it is the technology of management and logistics, rather than mechanical engineering. The pyramid complexes were never isolated monuments, but were part of elaborate architectural ensembles that included valley temples located at the edge of the Nile's floodplain, where the pharaoh's body would first arrive by boat during the funeral procession, and from there, covered causeways, often several hundred meters long, led upward to mortuary temples built against the eastern face of the pyramid, where daily offerings would be made and rituals performed to sustain the pharaoh's spirit in the afterlife. And these temples, though most have been destroyed or reduced to fragmentary ruins, were once impressive structures in their own right, with colonnaded halls, sanctuaries, storerooms for offerings, and courtyards where the king's statues stow, OD to receive worship. And the causeway served not just as a functional corridor, but as a symbolic pathway between the realm of the living, represented by the valley temple near the Nile, where life-giving water flowed, and the realm of the dead, represented by the pyramid on the high desert plateau, and the valley temple of Khafre, one of the best preserved examples, built of massive limestone blocks faced with polished granite and originally containing dozens of statues of the king, gives us a sense of the grandeur these structures once possessed, with its stark, powerful architecture and play of light and shadow in its halls, creating an atmosphere of solemnity and majesty entirely appropriate to its religious function. And recent excavations have revealed that these temples were busy places, not abandoned after the pharaoh's burial, but maintained by staffs of priests who performed daily rituals for generations, even centuries, making offerings of food, drink, and incense, reciting prayers and spells, and keeping alive the cult of the deceased king, and this required substantial economic support. With pyramid cities established nearby, their populations dedicated to serving the eternal needs of the dead pharaoh, supplied by estates throughout Egypt that were specifically designated to provide offerings, creating an economic system that tied significant portions of the nation's resources to the maintenance of these funerary cults. Though eventually, as dynasties changed and time passed, these cults declined and the temples fell into ruin, their stone robbed for use in other building projects, leaving us with the fragmentary remains that archaeologists study today, piecing together from broken walls and scattered blocks the grand vision that once animated these spaces. The interior architecture of the Great Pyramid represents perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of its construction. For while the exterior mass is impressive in its scale, it is the precisely engineered internal chambers and passages that truly showcase the builder's technical mastery, beginning with the original descending passage that plunges down from the north face at an angle of 26 degrees, cutting first through the masonry and then deep into the bedrock beneath the pyramid, terminating in an unfinished chamber more than 30 meters below ground level, a space whose purpose remains mysterious, for it appears never to have been completed and may represent either an abandoned burial chamber from an earlier phase of the pyramid's design, or perhaps a symbolic representation of the underworld through which the pharaoh's spirit would need to pass. And ascending from this descending passage is the equally precisely angled ascending corridor, only about 1 meter square in cross-section, forcing modern visitors to climb in an uncomfortable crouch for more than 38 meters before emerging into the Grand Gallery, that extraordinary architectural space that rises 8 meters high and extends for 46 meters, its corbelled ceiling creating a soaring effect that must have seemed almost miraculous to ancient visitors, each successive course of stone projecting slightly inward from the one below in a series of carefully calculated steps until the gap at the top is narrow enough to be spanned by individual blocks, and the walls retain evidence of fixtures that may have held wooden beams or other installations whose purpose we can only guess, though many researchers believe they were part of a system used to lower the granite plugs that sealed the ascending corridor after the pharaoh's burial, an attempt to prevent tomb robbers from accessing the upper chambers, though ultimately an unsuccessful one. And at the top of the Grand Gallery, a short horizontal passage leads to the king's chamber, a room constructed entirely of massive red granite blocks transported more than 800 kilometers from the quarries at Aswan, each block weighing many tons, fitted together with such precision that the joints between them are barely visible. And within this chamber stands the granite sarcophagus, empty when first explored in antiquity, roughly hewn and undecorated, too large to have been brought through the passages, and so must have been installed during construction, its lid long since removed or destroyed, and above this chamber, relieving the immense weight of the pyramid pressing down from above, are 5 additional chambers, spaces that serve no function except to distribute stress away from the burial chamber below, the topmost having a pointed roof formed by massive limestone beams leaning against each other at an angle, creating a primitive but effective arch that channels the weight to either side. And in these relieving chambers, invisible to visitors below, are some of the only hieroglyphic inscriptions found within the Great Pyramid. Quarry marks and work gang notations painted in red ochre, including the only contemporary mention of Khufu's name found within the structure, proving beyond doubt that this pyramid was indeed his. The so-called Queen's Chamber, despite its name, a designation given by Arab explorers in medieval times and having no connection to ancient Egyptian practice, presents its own mysteries, for it lies at the end of a horizontal passage that branches off from the ascending corridor before the Grand Gallery, and the chamber itself is smaller than the King's Chamber and built of limestone rather than granite, with a pointed corbelled ceiling, similar in construction, though less grand in scale to that of the Grand Gallery. And uniquely, this chamber has 2 shafts extending from its north and south walls, similar to those in the King's Chamber, but with a crucial difference. For they do not extend all the way to the exterior of the pyramid, but terminate within the masonry. And stranger still, The mouths of these shafts were originally concealed behind the chamber's wall stones and were only discovered in the 19th century when an archaeologist noticed cracks in the walls and decided to investigate. And in the 1,990 seconds, a robot equipped with a camera was sent up the southern shaft, and after 65 meters, encountered a limestone block equipped with 2 copper fittings, appearing for all the world like a door. And when researchers eventually drilled through this block in 2002, they found not a chamber, but another similar block just beyond, suggesting either that these shafts served some purpose we don't yet understand, or that they were abandoned during construction, though the careful sealing suggests they were intentional features, not simply mistakes. And the discovery in recent years of what appears to be writing on the floor just beyond the first door, revealed by a more sophisticated robot equipped with fiber optic cameras that can see around corners, has only deepened the mystery. For these marks, if they are indeed writing and not just random scratches, could potentially shed light on the shaft's purpose if only we could properly examine and translate them. The challenges the ancient engineers faced in securing these tombs against robbery were immense, and they employed various strategies to protect the pharaoh's burial, knowing from painful experience that tomb robbers were already a problem even in the Old Kingdom, for the desire to plunder the wealth buried with the dead was as old as the practice of burial itself and the very grandeur of the pyramids, advertising as they did the presence of immense riches within, made them irresistible targets for thieves willing to risk the religious and legal consequences of violating a pharaoh's tomb. And the builders tried to deter robbers through a combination of massive granite plug blocks that sealed the ascending corridor, false passages and dummy chambers designed to mislead and frustrate intruders, and the sheer difficulty of cutting through solid limestone with ancient tools. Yet ultimately, none of these measures proved sufficient, for the pyramids were robbed, probably within a few generations of their construction, during periods of political instability when central authority broke down and local officials either could not or would not protect the royal tombs and the robbers, often working with inside knowledge from priests or workers who knew the tomb's layouts, would tunnel around the plug blocks, following the softer limestone rather than attempting to move or break the granite barriers. And they would strip the tombs of everything valuable, melting down gold, prying precious stones from their settings, and in some cases even breaking apart the royal mummies to retrieve amulets and jewelry that had been wrapped within the linen bandages, showing a ruthlessness that modern sensibilities find shocking, but which reflected the desperate poverty that many Egyptians faced and the enormous wealth that the tombs represented. And while we might wish that the pyramid's contents had been preserved intact for archaeological study, the reality is that tomb robbery has been a constant throughout Egyptian history, and the pyramids at Giza were violated so long ago that even ancient Egyptian records refer to them as monuments of a bygone age, whose original purposes and meanings had been partly forgotten. Flanking the Great Pyramids of Khufu and Menkaure are smaller satellite pyramids, often called the Queen's Pyramids, though this designation is not entirely accurate. For while some certainly served as burial places for royal wives and daughters, others may have had different functions, possibly serving as cult pyramids or as repositories for the pharaoh's internal organs or aspects of his ka, that vital force that ancient Egyptians believed animated living beings and needed to be preserved and sustained after death. And these smaller structures, though dwarfed by their massive neighbors, were nevertheless substantial monuments in their own right, carefully oriented and constructed with the same attention to precision as the larger pyramids, though they employed simpler internal arrangements, typically consisting of a single descending passage leading to a burial chamber, without the complex system of corridors and galleries that characterize the Great Pyramids. An archaeological excavation of these structures has revealed fascinating details about royal funerary practices, including evidence of rich burial goods that were later removed by robbers, and the temples associated with these pyramids, though much destroyed, have yielded inscriptions that identify some of their occupants, giving us rare glimpses into the lives of royal women who otherwise would be little more than names in king lists, if they were remembered at all. The controversy surrounding the purported discovery of vast underground structures beneath the Giza Plateau, announced with great fanfare in early 2025 by a team of researchers using advanced synthetic aperture radar imaging, illustrates both the enduring fascination that these monuments exert on public imagination and the importance of careful scientific validation before accepting extraordinary claims. For while the researchers presented radar data that they interpreted as showing massive artificial structures, including what they described as vertical shafts, stairways, and chambers extending as deep as 2 kilometers beneath the surface, the archaeological establishment has responded with considerable skepticism, pointing out that synthetic aperture radar, while a powerful tool, becomes increasingly unreliable at greater depths and can produce anomalous readings that are difficult to interpret, especially in geologically complex areas like the Giza Plateau, where natural limestone karst formations, cavities created by ancient groundwater flow, and other natural features can create signals that superficially resemble artificial structures. And prominent Egyptologists, including Zahi Hawass, have stated unequivocally that no such discoveries have been made beneath the pyramids, emphasizing that any significant archaeological work at Giza requires permits from Egyptian authorities and that no such permits were issued for excavation based on these radar findings. And the controversy has been further complicated by the fact that some of the images circulated on social media and in popular media appear to have been misinterpreted or even manipulated, showing what are claimed to be vast underground cities, but which experts identify as misrepresented data or computer-generated visualizations, rather than actual archaeological evidence. Yet the story spread rapidly through online channels, feeding into a broader ecosystem of alternative archaeology claims that often blur the line between legitimate scientific inquiry and pseudoscientific speculation, reminding us that in our age of instant global communication, sensational claims can achieve wide circulation before proper verification occurs. And while it is certainly possible that tunnels, tombs, or other features remain undiscovered beneath the Giza Plateau, for the necropolis is vast, and much of it has never been systematically explored. Any such discoveries will need to be verified through multiple independent methods and properly excavated by trained archaeologists before they can be accepted as genuine, rather than announced through press releases and social media posts that bypass the normal processes of peer review and scholarly validation that ensure the reliability of archaeological knowledge. The Pyramid of Menkaure stands as a cautionary tale in the history of ancient Egyptian architecture, a monument that began with ambitious intentions but ended in what appears to have been a catastrophic structural failure, teaching lessons that would influence all subsequent pyramid construction. For this pyramid, located south of Cairo and attributed to Pharaoh Sneferu, though possibly begun by his predecessor Huni, started as a step pyramid with 7 or 8 tiers, but was then modified during construction to become a true smooth-sided pyramid by filling in the steps and adding an outer casing of limestone. Yet this transformation proved to be the monument's undoing, for the outer casing stones were laid on smooth limestone faces of the step pyramid rather than being properly bonded into the underlying structure. And furthermore, these casing stones rested on sand rather than solid bedrock, creating an inherently unstable arrangement. And at some point, probably during construction or shortly after completion, this outer shell catastrophically collapsed, with the massive blocks tumbling down to create the enormous pile of rubble that still surrounds the pyramid's base, giving it the distinctive appearance of a tower rising from a hill of debris. And this disaster, witnessed by the builders and architects of the time, must have been a shocking demonstration of the consequences of cutting corners and making assumptions about structural stability without adequate understanding of the forces involved. And the lessons learned are evident in Sneferu's next project, the Bent Pyramid at Dashur, where the builders employed more conservative angles and took greater care with the foundation and the bonding of the casing stones. And in the subsequent Red Pyramid and the Great Pyramids at Giza, where we see the full flowering of pyramid building expertise, informed by the failures and near failures of earlier attempts, demonstrating that even in the ancient world, Engineering was an iterative process of learning from mistakes, testing hypotheses, and gradually refining techniques until they could be executed with confidence and reliability. The history of pyramid exploration by Europeans and Americans is itself a fascinating chronicle of evolving attitudes toward ancient monuments and the development of archaeology as a scientific discipline, beginning with the adventurers and treasure hunters of the early 19th century, who approached the pyramids with a combination of romantic enthusiasm and shocking disregard for the preservation of antiquities. Men like Giovanni Belzoni, a former circus strongman who used battering rams and explosives to force his way into temples and tombs, shipping artifacts back to European museums and private collectors, with little documentation of where they were found or what other materials might have been associated with them, treating ancient Egypt as a vast quarry of curiosities to be plundered for the entertainment and edification of Western audiences. And while we might judge these early explorers harshly by modern standards, it is worth remembering that the very concept of archaeological preservation had not yet been developed. And what seems like vandalism to us was, in their eyes, the recovery of important historical materials that might otherwise be lost or destroyed. And it was Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in 1798, though primarily military in purpose, that began the transformation of Egyptology from treasure hunting to scientific study. For Napoleon brought with him a corps of scholars, the Commission des Sciences et des Arts, including engineers, naturalists, artists, and antiquarians, who were tasked with documenting everything they encountered. And these scholars measured the pyramids with unprecedented precision, drew detailed plans and elevations, copied inscriptions, and collected specimens, producing the monumental Description de l'Egypte, a multi-volume work published between 1809 and 1829 that revealed ancient Egypt to European readers in systematic detail for the first time, with engravings of such quality and accuracy that they remain valuable references today. And among the expedition's members was Edmé François Jomard, who surveyed the pyramids and temples of Giza, and whose measurements of the Great Pyramid sparked decades of mathematical speculation about whether the monument's dimensions encoded advanced knowledge of the Earth's dimensions and mathematical constants, theories that ranged from plausible to wildly speculative, but which at least had the virtue of encouraging careful measurement and analysis. It was not until the late 19th century that archaeology in Egypt began to assume anything like its modern form, and the transformational figure in this development was William Matthew Flinders Petrie, who brought to pyramid study a rigor and systematic approach that had never been applied before. Arriving at Giza in 1880 with equipment he had designed himself for making precise measurements, including specially constructed measuring rods accurate to 1/100th of an inch and a surveying theodolite, and Petrie spent months meticulously measuring every accessible surface of the Great Pyramid, mapping its passages and chambers, recording the dimensions of individual blocks, and documenting construction details that previous visitors had overlooked. And his published work, The Pyramids and Temples of Giza, presented measurements of such accuracy that they could be used to test various theories about the pyramid's construction and purpose, definitively demolishing some of the more fantastical claims about encoded mathematical knowledge, while confirming that the builders had achieved truly impressive precision in their layout and alignment. And Petrie did not limit himself to the pyramids, but excavated the surrounding cemeteries and settlement areas, recovering thousands of artifacts and demonstrating through careful stratigraphic excavation that different areas of the site were used in different periods, establishing chronologies that are still accepted today. And he pioneered the analysis of pottery as a dating tool, recognizing that ceramic styles changed over time in consistent ways, and that pottery fragments, which were abundant and usually ignored by treasure hunters, could provide crucial chronological information. And his insistence on recording the context of every find, noting precisely where each artifact was discovered and what other materials were associated with it, established principles that became fundamental to modern archaeological practice ensuring that future excavations would produce not just collections of interesting objects, but data that could answer historical questions about how people lived, what they believed, and how their societies were organized. The economic importance of the pyramids and Egypt's other ancient monuments to the modern nation cannot be overstated. For tourism has become one of the country's most vital industries, generating billions of dollars in revenue annually and providing employment for hundreds of thousands of Egyptians, from tour guides and hotel workers to drivers, craftsmen selling souvenirs, and the vast infrastructure that supports the movement of millions of visitors each year. And in 2024, Egypt recorded tourism revenues exceeding $14 billion, with the pyramids at Giza being the single most visited site in the country, attracting approximately 15 million visitors annually who come from every corner of the globe to witness these ancient marvels firsthand. And the opening of the Grand Egyptian Museum in 2025, positioned near the Giza Plateau and housing more than 100,000 artifacts, including the complete collection of Tutankhamun's treasures, represents a massive investment in cultural tourism infrastructure designed to both accommodate the growing numbers of visitors and provide them with context and educational content that enhances their understanding of what they are seeing, transforming the visit from a simple viewing of impressive monuments into a deeper engagement with ancient Egyptian civilization. And the museum itself, a modern architectural marvel with its vast halls and sophisticated climate control and display systems, creates a dialogue between ancient and contemporary achievement, demonstrating Egypt's commitment to preserving its heritage while also showcasing its capacity for world-class modern construction and museum management. Though the project don't face numerous delays and cost overruns that spark debate about priorities and resource allocation in a country facing significant economic challenges, yet the government's position has been that investment in tourism infrastructure ultimately benefits the entire economy by attracting foreign currency and creating jobs that would not otherwise exist, and there is considerable evidence to support this view. For the multiplier effects of tourism spending ripple through the economy, with money spent by visitors supporting not just the immediate tourism sector, but also agriculture that supplies hotels and restaurants, transportation networks, and manufacturing of goods that tourists purchase, creating a complex economic ecosystem that depends on the continued flow of international visitors to these ancient sites. The challenge facing Egyptian authorities is to balance this economic imperative with the preservation needs of monuments that are suffering from the very popularity that makes them economically valuable, for the sheer number of visitors inevitably causes wear and tear. With millions of feet traversing ancient stones, hands touching walls, breath and body heat creating humidity in enclosed spaces that were never designed for mass visitation, and the infrastructure required to support tourism, from parking lots to visitor centers, must be carefully planned to avoid encroaching on the archaeological zones or damaging subsurface remains. And there have been ongoing debates about how many visitors should be allowed, whether certain areas should be placed off limits in TA, Ireland, how to balance the desire to allow people to experience these monuments intimately with the need to protect them for future generations. And increasingly, authorities are turning to technology to help solve these dilemmas, creating detailed replica tombs that can absorb tourist traffic, while fragile originals are closed for conservation, developing virtual reality experiences that allow people to explore spaces that cannot safely accommodate physical visitors, and implementing reservation systems and timed entry to spread visitation more evenly throughout the day and prevent overcrowding. And while some purists lament that these measures diminish the authenticity of the experience, most visitors seem willing to accept reasonable restrictions if they understand that the alternative might be the permanent closure or irreversible damage of sites they have traveled thousands of miles to see, and education plays a crucial role in this process. For visitors who understand the fragility of what they are seeing and the threats it faces are more likely to follow rules, treat the monuments with respect, and support conservation efforts through entrance fees and donations, transforming them from passive consumers of a tourist attraction into active participants in preservation. The future of pyramid research will be shaped increasingly by technologies that allow us to see and understand these monuments in ways that would have been impossible even a generation ago. For we now have tools that can peer inside solid stone without drilling or damaging the structure, that can create three-dimensional models accurate to the millimeter, that can analyze materials non-destructively to understand their composition and condition, that can simulate stresses and forces to predict how structures will behave over time. And these capabilities are revolutionizing not just our understanding of how the pyramids were built, but also how we can best preserve them. And the Scan Pyramids project represents the cutting edge of this technological approach, deploying multiple complementary techniques, including muon tomography, infrared thermography, and photogrammetry to create comprehensive maps of the pyramid's internal and external features, revealing anomalies that might indicate hidden chambers or structural weaknesses requiring attention. And the data generated by these projects is not just useful for research, but also for creating permanent digital records of the monuments in their current state, a form of preservation that ensures that even if the physical structures were to be damaged or destroyed, we would have detailed records that could inform reconstruction or simply preserve knowledge for future generations. And various organizations, including SciArc, have been working to create three-dimensional laser scans of heritage sites around the world, creating a digital archive that serves as a backup of human cultural achievement, a library of monuments captured in incredible detail. And for the pyramids, such records are invaluable, documenting current conditions with precision that allows comparison over time to track deterioration and assess the effectiveness of conservation measures. And increasingly, these digital models are being made available to researchers and the public through online platforms, democratizing access to information that was once the privilege of scholars who could travel to Egypt and spend time at the sites. And students anywhere in the world can now examine detailed three-dimensional models of the pyramids, measuring passages, analyzing construction techniques, and formulating their own theories without ever leaving their classrooms. And while this virtual access can never fully replace the experience of standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid or crawling through the ancient passages, it represents a massive expansion of who can participate in the study and appreciation of these monuments. The relationship between the pyramids and the broader landscape of the Giza Plateau reveals sophisticated urban planning and religious conceptualization that extended far beyond the monuments themselves. For the three Great Pyramids were not isolated structures, but rather the focal points of extensive complexes that included subsidiary pyramids, boat pits, temples, causeways, and vast cemeteries where nobles and officials of the royal court were buried in mastaba tombs, those rectangular structures with sloping sides that take their name from the Arabic word for bench, arranged in careful grid patterns, like streets in a city of the dead. And the overall layout of the site demonstrates careful consideration of sight lines, astronomical alignments, and the symbolic geography of ancient Egyptian religion. With the pyramids positioned on the west bank of the Nile, the direction of the setting sun, and therefore associated with death and the afterlife, while the living inhabited the eastern bank, the direction of the rising sun and new life, and the causeways that connected the valley temples to the mortuary temples literally bridged these two realms, providing a pathway along which the funeral procession would carry the deceased pharaoh from the land of the living to his final resting place among the stars. And recent excavations and survey work have revealed that the plateau was far more developed than previously understood, with evidence of administrative buildings, workshops where craftsmen produced grave goods and maintained the temples, housing for the priests and workers who tended the pyramid complexes, and infrastructure including roads, water management systems, and storage facilities that supported what was essentially a permanent settlement dedicated to serving the needs of the dead kings. And this realization has transformed our understanding of the pyramids from isolated architectural achievements to components of larger systems that required sustained effort and resources to build and then to maintain for generations and even centuries after the pharaohs for whom they were built had passed into the realm of legend. The technological innovation represented by the pyramids extended beyond their architecture to encompass advances in surveying, mathematics, astronomy, project management, and logistics that required the development of new tools and techniques that would have applications far beyond pyramid construction, for the ability to quarry, transport, and precisely position millions of blocks of stone required not just muscle power, but careful planning, the invention of specialized tools, the training of skilled workers, and the creation of administrative systems capable of coordinating the activities of thousands of people. And evidence suggests that the pyramid projects served as engines of technological and social development, driving innovations in everything from rope making to copper smelting, from ceramic production to accounting methods, creating knowledge and capabilities that could be applied to other large-scale projects, including temple construction, canal digging, mining operations, and military campaigns, and the organizational structures created to manage pyramid construction, with their hierarchies of officials, specialized work gangs, systems for distributing rations and tracking labor contributions, provided templates for state administration that would be refined and elaborated over the centuries of pharaonic rule. And in this sense, the pyramids were not just monuments to individual kings, but investments in state capacity, demonstrations of what could be accomplished through centralized planning and the mobilization of resources. And the very fact that these monuments still stand thousands of years later is a testament to the thoroughness with which the ancient Egyptians approached their execution, for they were not content with creating structures that would last a few generations, but aimed for permanence, for eternity. And they largely succeeded, building monuments that have outlasted the civilization that created them, standing as witnesses to human achievement, when that achievement is directed toward goals that transcend immediate utility and reach for something greater, for meaning, for legacy, for immortality achieved through stone and skill and unwavering dedication to a vision of what could be made permanent in an impermanent world. Yet even as we celebrate the achievements of the pyramid builders, we must acknowledge the human cost of these projects. For while modern archaeology has definitively disproven the old notion that the pyramids were built by masses of enslaved people driven by whips and desperation, the reality revealed by excavation of workers' villages and analysis of skeletal remains is more complex, showing a population that was generally well-fed and received medical care when injured, but also one that labored under conditions that were harsh by any standard, hauling enormous weights across great distances, working in the blazing sun and desert dust, suffering injuries and ailments that the medical knowledge of the time could only partially address. And while many workers may have participated willingly, motivated by religious devotion, national pride, or simply the need for employment and the rations that pyramid service provided, we should not romanticize the conditions under which they labored, for theirs was a world of backbreaking toil, of accidents and exhaustion, of lives spent in service to projects whose completion many individual workers would never see. And the skeletal remains found in the workers' cemeteries tell stories of fractures, arthritis, and other conditions resulting from heavy labor, reminding us that these magnificent monuments were built not by abstract historical forces, but by individual human beings who paid a physical price for their construction. And while the pyramid builders were honored in death with burial near the monuments they helped create, a privilege that suggests respect and recognition of their contribution, we should remember that respect and exploitation are not mutually exclusive, and that even in societies that value certain forms of labor, the actual laborers may suffer. And this is not to diminish the achievement of the pyramids or to judge ancient Egyptian society by modern standards, but simply to acknowledge the full human reality of what these monuments represent, both in terms of what they demonstrate about human capabilities and what they reveal about the costs that monumental ambitions can impose on those who must do the actual work of realization. The pyramids have occupied a central place in human imagination for thousands of years, inspiring not just archaeological investigation, but countless works of art, literature, philosophy, and speculation, serving as symbols that can be interpreted in multiple ways depending on the perspective of the observer. For some, seeing them primarily as architectural triumphs, others as religious statements, still others as political propaganda or economic follies. And throughout history, They have been used as examples and arguments about human nature, the capacity for organized labor, the relationship between rulers and ruled, the permanence or impermanence of human achievement, and even the possibility of alien intervention or lost advanced civilizations. Though these latter theories, while popular in certain circles, find no support in actual archaeological evidence and serve mainly to diminish rather than enhance our appreciation of what ancient Egyptians actually accomplished through their own ingenuity and effort. And the persistence of such fringe theories speaks to a broader phenomenon in which the pyramids' very magnificence seems to challenge some people's conception of what ancient humans could achieve, leading them to posit external assistance rather than accepting that our ancestors, given sufficient motivation, organization, and time, were capable of extraordinary things using the tools and knowledge available to them. And this tendency to underestimate ancient capabilities is unfortunate because it robs these civilizations of credit for their genuine achievements while also obscuring the actual methods they used, which are fascinating in their own right and provide valuable insights into early engineering, mathematics, and social organization. The question of why pyramid building ceased after the Old Kingdom is itself revealing, for it demonstrates that the practice was not an inevitable expression of Egyptian civilization, but rather a specific response to particular historical, religious, and political circumstances that eventually changed, and several factors contributed to the decline of pyramid construction, including economic considerations. For the enormous resources required to build and maintain a pyramid complex represented a significant drain on the state's finances and labor pool, resources that later pharaohs found more effective to direct toward other purposes, and religious developments. As the theology of kingship evolved and new conceptions of the afterlife gained prominence, reducing the importance of the pyramid as a vehicle for resurrection and transformation, and political changes for the centralized power of the Old Kingdom pharaohs, which had enabled them to command the resources necessary for pyramid construction, fragmented during the first intermediate period, and while strong central government was later restored, subsequent rulers chose to express their power through different means, building elaborate temple complexes, cutting rock tombs in hidden valleys, or investing in military campaigns and territorial expansion, rather than constructing massive stone mountains. And the very success of pyramid building may have contributed to its decline, for how could any later pharaoh hope to surpass the Great Pyramid of Khufu? And why would they want to try when doing so would consume resources desperately needed for more practical purposes? And so pyramid building became a practice of the past, remembered and admired, but not actively continued, though the pyramids themselves remained as landmarks and tourist attractions even in ancient times, visited by Greek and Roman travelers who marveled at them just as modern tourists do, and who left their own graffiti on the walls, proving that the impulse to leave one's mark on famous monuments is nothing new. In the 20th and 21st centuries, our understanding of the pyramids has been revolutionized, not just by archaeological discoveries, but by interdisciplinary approaches that bring together insights from engineering, geology, astronomy, computer science, materials, science, and other fields, creating a more comprehensive picture of how these monuments were conceived, designed, and executed, and we are now able to answer questions that previous generations could only speculate about, using techniques ranging from analysis of ancient tool marks under microscopes, to computer simulations of stress distribution in stone structures, to chemical analysis of mortar and organic materials that can be radiocarbon dated, to establish precise chronologies. And each new discovery, each new analytical technique, each new perspective adds another piece to the puzzle, though we must also acknowledge that some questions may never be fully answered, for the passage of time has erased much evidence. Ancient written records are limited and often ambiguous, and the people who built the pyramids left no detailed construction manuals, only the monuments themselves and the scattered clues that archaeologists have painstakingly recovered and interpreted. And there is a strange poetry in this incompleteness, in the fact that these structures, which were meant to ensure immortality through their permanence, have instead become mysteries their very survival, ensuring that we will never stop asking questions about them, never stop trying to understand the civilization that created them and the individuals who conceived and built them. And perhaps this endless fascination is its own form of immortality, different from what the pharaohs intended, but no less real. For as long as humans exist and care about their past, the pyramids will be studied, visited, photographed, measured, theorized about, serving as touchstones that connect us to our species' deep history and remind us of what humans have always been capable of when vision combines with determination and the willingness to undertake projects whose completion may lie decades in the future, requiring faith that the effort will be worthwhile, even if we ourselves may not live to see the final result. The environmental and geological factors that have shaped the pyramid's survival over millennia are themselves worthy of study. For limestone, while a relatively soft stone that can be cut and shaped with bronze and copper tools, is also reactive to chemical weathering, particularly in the presence of moisture and atmospheric pollutants, and the pyramids have been exposed to both natural and human-caused environmental stresses for more than 4,000 years, including wind erosion that has smoothed and rounded exposed surfaces, salt crystallization from groundwater that causes stone to flake and crumble, thermal expansion and contraction from the extreme temperature variations between day and night in the desert, biological colonization by bacteria, algae, and lichens that can accelerate stone decay, and in modern times, acid rain and air pollution from Cairo's vehicles and industries, which have created crusts of gypsum and other compounds on the pyramid surfaces that are both unsightly and damaging to the underlying stone. And understanding these processes is essential for developing effective conservation strategies. For simply cleaning the stones or applying protective coatings without understanding the chemistry and physics involved can actually accelerate decay, as some early conservation efforts discovered to their cost. And this has led to much more cautious and scientifically grounded approaches in recent decades, with extensive testing and monitoring before any intervention is undertaken, and the development of new materials and techniques specifically designed for the conservation of limestone in desert environments, drawing on research conducted at the pyramids, but also applicable to threatened monuments around the world. For the challenges of preserving ancient stone structures in harsh climates are not unique to Egypt, and solutions developed for the pyramids may help save other irreplaceable sites from deterioration and eventual loss. The comparison between the pyramids and other ancient monuments around the world reveals both universal human impulses and culturally specific expressions. For pyramid-shaped structures appear in multiple ancient civilizations, including Mesopotamia with its ziggurats, Mesoamerica with the stepped pyramids of the Maya and Aztecs, and various other cultures that independently discovered that the pyramid form offers inherent structural stability, allowing great heights to be achieved without requiring the sophisticated engineering knowledge necessary for other architectural forms. Yet despite these superficial similarities, the Egyptian pyramids remain unique in their scale, their precision, their integration with sophisticated astronomical and religious concepts, and their role as complete funerary complexes rather than temple platforms or administrative centers. And studying these parallels and divergences helps us understand both what was distinctive about ancient Egyptian civilization and what represents common responses to common challenges faced by early complex societies attempting to create monumental architecture. And the pyramids thus serve as data points in the larger story of human cultural evolution, showing how different societies, working independently with different materials and different worldviews, nonetheless often arrived at similar solutions to the problem of how to build something that would last, something that would impress, something that would serve as a permanent marker of human presence and achievement in a world that is constantly changing and erasing the traces of those who came before. The role of the Nile River in making pyramid construction possible cannot be overstated, for this great watercourse was not just a source of water and fertile soil, but also a transportation network that allowed the movement of materials and people on a scale that would have been impossible overland, and the annual inundation of the Nile, far from being an obstacle to construction, was actually utilized by the pyramid builders. For during the months when the river flooded and agricultural work was impossible, farmers were available for labor on state projects, and the high water level meant that boats could navigate closer to the construction sites than would be possible during the low water season, allowing the delivery of stone blocks and other materials right to the base of the plateau. And even more remarkably, recent research suggests that an ancient branch of the Nile, now dried up and buried under desert sand, once flowed much closer to the pyramids than the current riverbed, providing a water highway that brought materials almost directly to the construction sites. And surveys using ground-penetrating radar and analysis of sediment cores have traced the course of this ancient waterway, revealing a landscape quite different from what we see today, with the pyramids positioned not in the desert, but at the interface between the fertile valley and the arid plateau, a liminal zone between life and death that perfectly embodied their religious function. And understanding this ancient hydrology helps explain logistical puzzles about how massive quantities of material could be transported to the pyramid sites for moving stone blocks overland across shifting sand would have been enormously difficult, if not impossible. But floating them on barges during the flood season and then using wet sand and sledges to move them short distances to their final positions makes the entire enterprise much more comprehensible, demonstrating once again how the pyramid builders worked with rather than against the natural environment, using its rhythms and resources to accomplish their extraordinary goals. The social and political context in which the pyramids were built is equally important for understanding why they exist and what they meant to the people who created them. For the Old Kingdom was a period of strong, centralized government, with the pharaoh conceived not just as a political ruler, but as a living god, the intermediary between the human and divine realms, responsible for maintaining cosmic order and ensuring the proper functioning of the universe. And in this worldview, the pharaoh's successful transition to the afterlife was not just a personal matter, but a concern for the entire nation. For the well-being of Egypt depended on the king's ability to join the gods and continue to intercede on behalf of his people. And thus building a pyramid was not vanity or megalomania, but a religious necessity, an act of collective devotion comparable to the construction of great cathedrals in medieval Europe, requiring the participation and support of the entire society because the outcome affected everyone. And this explains why resources on such a vast scale could be mobilized for these projects, for they were not seen as wasteful expenditures, but as investments in cosmic stability and national security, ensuring the continuation of the ordered world against the forces of chaos that constantly threatened to overwhelm it. And while modern secular sensibilities may find it difficult to comprehend such beliefs, we must try to understand them on their own terms. If we are to grasp why the pyramids were built and what they represented to their creators, for these monuments were not irrational follies, but rational responses to a worldview in which the maintenance of proper relationships between gods, kings, and cosmos was the most important task humans could undertake, more important than any immediate practical concern. And the pyramid's very existence demonstrates the power of religious belief to mobilize human effort toward goals that transcend individual survival or comfort, creating something that would serve not temporal needs, but eternal purposes, or at least purposes that were conceived as eternal, even if our own age has difficulty accepting such concepts. The legacy of the pyramids extends far beyond archaeology and tourism into realms of architecture, engineering, education, and even popular culture, where these monuments have become shorthand for ancient mystery, human achievement, and the passage of time, appearing in everything from corporate logos to science fiction narratives to philosophical meditations on mortality and permanence. And architects and engineers study the pyramids not just as historical curiosities, but as examples of successful large-scale construction that has endured for millennia, asking what principles guided their design, what techniques ensured their stability, what lessons can be extracted that might apply to modern building projects. And while contemporary construction uses radically different materials and methods, the fundamental challenges of managing large projects, coordinating complex workflows, ensuring quality control, and building for longevity remain relevant, and the pyramids offer case studies in how these challenges can be met, though translating insights from ancient contexts to modern ones requires careful thought about what principles are truly transferable and what aspects are specific to their historical moment. And there's always a danger of oversimplification, of extracting lessons that seem profound, but may not actually reflect the reality of how the pyramids were built or what their builders were trying to achieve. Yet the exercise of thinking seriously about these ancient projects, of trying to understand them as engineering accomplishments rather than just archaeological sites, can illuminate both the monuments themselves and the nature of human problem solving across different eras and cultures, revealing continuities that transcend technological change and highlighting the eternal human drive to build, to create, to make one's mark on the physical world in ways that will outlast individual lifetimes. The ongoing debates about construction methods, while sometimes frustrating in their inconclusiveness, actually represent healthy scientific discourse, with different researchers proposing hypotheses, testing them through experimental archaeology or computer modeling, gathering evidence from the monuments themselves, and revising their theories in light of new data. And this iterative process, though it may never produce a single definitive answer that satisfies everyone, gradually narrows the range of plausible explanations and eliminates hypotheses that cannot be reconciled with physical evidence. And the fact that multiple methods might have been used, different techniques employed at different stages of construction or for different purposes, means that seeking a single unified theory may be misguided, for the pyramid builders were pragmatic problem solvers who likely used whatever approach worked best for each particular challenge, adapting their methods as circumstances required and as they gained experience and refined their techniques. And the variety of theories proposed by modern researchers may thus reflect actual variety in ancient practice, rather than simply demonstrating our ignorance, though distinguishing between these possibilities requires careful analysis of evidence that is often ambiguous or incomplete. And this is where interdisciplinary collaboration becomes essential, bringing together archaeologists who understand the cultural context, engineers who can evaluate structural proposals, geologists who can identify stone sources and analyze weathering patterns, physicists who can deploy advanced scanning technologies, and many other specialists whose expertise illuminates different aspects of the puzzle, creating a more complete picture than any single discipline could produce alone. The questions that remain unanswered about the pyramids are in some ways as interesting as those we have resolved, for they point to the limits of archaeological knowledge and remind us that the past, however carefully we study it, can never be fully recovered, that there will always be aspects of ancient life and thought that elude us because the evidence has not survived, or because we lack the conceptual framework to interpret correctly what evidence we have. And among the enduring mysteries are questions about the precise religious rituals conducted in the pyramid complexes. For while we have texts describing some ceremonies, we lack detailed accounts that would allow us to reconstruct exactly what happened during the king's funeral or during the daily offerings made to sustain his spirit, and we know little about the individuals who served as priests and officials in these complexes, what their lives were like, how they were selected and trained, what they truly believed about the efficacy of the rituals they performed. And we can only speculate about the thoughts and feelings of the workers who built the pyramids, whether they took pride in their work, whether they believed in the religious purpose they were serving, whether they resented the demands placed upon them or accepted them as natural and necessary. For while we have their bones and the settlements where they lived and the tools they used, we do not have their voices, their personal testimonies, their interior lives. And this absence reminds us that history is not just about facts and artifacts, but about an experience, about consciousness and meaning and the subjective dimensions of existence that leave few traces in the archaeological record. And while we can build detailed models of how the pyramids were constructed and what functions they served, we can never fully inhabit the worldview of those who created them, never completely understand what these monuments meant in their original context. And this gap between their experience and our understanding is unbridgeable, though we can narrow it through careful study and imaginative reconstruction, and perhaps this is as it should be, for complete understanding would in some sense diminish the pyramids, rob them of their mystery and their power to provoke wonder and contemplation. And their incompleteness, their resistance to final explanation, may be part of what keeps them alive in human consciousness generation after generation. The pyramids as symbols of Egypt have played complex roles in that nation's modern history, serving as sources of national pride and cultural identity, but also as reminders of a past that can seem disconnected from contemporary concerns. For while tourists come from around the world to admire these ancient monuments, many Egyptians themselves have complex and sometimes ambivalent relationships with them, recognizing their economic importance and their status as national treasures, while also seeing them as relics of a vanished civilization that bears little relationship to modern Egyptian culture, which is Arabic-speaking and predominantly Muslim, quite different from the pharaonic civilization T. Hat built the pyramids, and yet there are efforts to reclaim this ancient heritage, to see it not as something foreign or irrelevant, but as part of a continuous Egyptian identity that stretches back thousands of years. And the pyramids play an important role in these narratives of national continuity, serving as proof of Egyptian capabilities and achievements, of a civilization that was great before Europe emerged from barbarism, of knowledge and sophistication that command respect and admiration. And in this way, the pyramids become not just archaeological sites, but political symbols, enlisted in contemporary debates about Egyptian identity, Arab identity, African identity, and Egypt's place in the modern world. And the government's investment in archaeological sites and museums can be understood partly as heritage preservation, but also as nation building, as the creation of shared symbols and narratives that can help unite a diverse population around common sources of pride, though such uses of the past are always complicated and potentially problematic, for they risk distorting history in service of present purposes, creating mythologized versions of ancient Egypt that may have little to do with historical reality, but serve contemporary political and cultural needs. The scientific study of the pyramids continues to generate new insights and occasional surprises, reminding us that even the most thoroughly studied sites can still yield discoveries, and recent years have seen advances in our understanding of everything from the sourcing of materials to the organization of LA. Bore to the symbolic meanings encoded in architectural features. And each of these discoveries, whether it makes headlines or appears only in specialized academic journals, adds incrementally to our knowledge, filling in details, clarifying relationships, sometimes confirming existing theories and sometimes challenging them. And the cumulative effect of decades of careful research has been to transform the pyramids from inscrutable mysteries into monuments that, while still not fully understood, are at least comprehensible in broad outline, and we can now speak with reasonable confidence about when they were built, who built them, how they were built in general terms, if not in every detail, why they were built, and what they meant to ancient Egyptians. Though each of these statements comes with qualifications and uncertainties that reflect the limitations of our evidence and the complexity of the subject matter, and honest researchers acknowledge these uncertainties rather than pretending to know more than the evidence supports, recognizing that admitting ignorance is not weakness, but intellectual honesty, and that the questions we cannot yet answer drive further research and discovery, keeping the field vital and dynamic rather than settled and closed. The environmental challenges facing the pyramids in the coming decades are significant and require coordinated international effort to address. For climate change is already affecting the monuments through changes in precipitation patterns, groundwater levels, temperature extremes, and the frequency of severe weather events. And while Egypt's generally arid climate has preserved the pyramids remarkably well compared to monuments in wetter regions, any significant changes in that climate could accelerate deterioration, and rising sea levels, though the pyramids are well inland, could affect the Nile Delta and potentially alter groundwater dynamics across the region, and the encroachment of urban development continues to threaten the archaeological context of the pyramids, with buildings and roads creeping closer despite regulations meant to protect buffer zones, and the sheer volume of visitors, while economically beneficial, creates conservation challenges that require careful management to balance access with preservation, And addressing these challenges will require not just Egyptian efforts, but international cooperation. For the pyramids are not just national treasures, but world heritage sites that belong, in a sense, to all humanity, and their loss would be felt globally. And organizations like UNESCO play important roles in coordinating preservation efforts, providing technical assistance, and mobilizing resources, though ultimate responsibility rests with Egypt as the host nation. And the commitment and capacity of Egyptian authorities to protect these sites will largely determine whether they survive another 1,000 years, or gradually succumb to the combined pressures of environmental stress, human impact, and inadequate conservation. The relationship between academic Egyptology and popular understanding of the pyramids remains fraught, with a persistent gap between what scholars know, believe based on careful analysis of evidence, and what circulates in popular media, where sensational claims and fringe theories often receive more attention than sober archaeological findings. And this gap creates frustrations on both sides, with academics lamenting the public's appetite for pseudoscience and conspiracy theories, while also recognizing that scholarly writing is often inaccessible to general readers, written in technical jargon, and published in expensive journals that most people never see. And efforts to bridge this gap through popular books, documentaries, museum exhibitions, and online content have met with varying success, sometimes reaching broad audiences, and sometimes preaching only to the already converted. And the challenge is to communicate the genuine excitement and significance of real archaeological discoveries in ways that capture public imagination without dumbing down the content or sacrificing accuracy. And some scholars have proven adept at this, writing engaging narratives that conveyed both the human drama of archaeological discovery and the intellectual satisfaction of solving historical puzzles, while others struggle to escape academic conventions and speak in voices that non-specialists can appreciate. And meanwhile, the field of Egyptology itself is evolving, becoming more diverse in terms of who practices it, where they come from, what questions they ask, and what methods they employ. And Egyptian archaeologists in particular are playing increasingly prominent roles in studying their own heritage, bringing perspectives and priorities that may differ from those of foreign researchers. And this internationalization and decolonization of Egyptology is long overdue and promises to enrich the field by incorporating voices and viewpoints that were historically marginalized or excluded, though tensions remain around issues of who has authority to interpret Egypt's past and who benefits from archaeological tourism and scholarship. The pyramids stand today not just as ancient monuments, but as bridges across time, connecting us to people who lived 45 centuries ago and who faced many of the same fundamental questions that we face about how to organize society, how to create meaning in the face of mortality, how to build something that will last, how to coordinate collective effort toward goals that transcend individual interests. And while the specific answers that ancient Egyptians developed were products of their particular circumstances, shaped by the Nile Valley's geography, by religious beliefs we only partly understand, by social structures and power relationships that have no exact modern parallels, the questions themselves are timeless, and contemplating the pyramids can prompt us to think about our own civilization's monuments and legacies, about what we are building and what will remain when we are gone, and whether the things we devote our resources and effort to truly merit the investment we make in them. And from this perspective, the pyramids become not just objects of historical study, but mirrors in which we can see reflected our own values, priorities, and aspirations, though we must be careful not to project too much of ourselves onto the past, not to make ancient Egyptians into proto-moderns who happen to use different technology, for they were products of their time as we are of ours, and the gulf that separates their worldview from ours is real and must be respected even as we search for continuities and connections, and this tension between similarity and difference, B2X. The familiar, and the alien, is part of what makes studying ancient civilizations endlessly fascinating. For we are simultaneously looking at something utterly foreign, a culture whose deepest assumptions about reality were fundamentally different from our own, and at something recognizably human, created by people who loved and feared, hoped and dreamed, struggled and achieved, just as we do. And this recognition of shared humanity across vast temporal and cultural distances can be profoundly moving, reminding us that for all our technological sophistication and accumulated knowledge, we remain fundamentally the same species that built the pyramids, with the same cognitive capacities, the same emotional range, the same ability to conceive ambitious projects and marshal the determination to execute them. And the pyramid's existence proves that humans have always been capable of greatness when circumstances allow and when vision and will combine to push beyond what seems possible, achieving things that amaze even those who come millennia later with all the advantages of modern science and technology. And this realization should give us both humility, recognizing that we are not so different from or superior to our ancestors, and confidence, understanding that if they could accomplish such feats with the limited tools at their disposal, then we too can solve the challenges we face. Whether those are technical problems requiring innovative engineering or social challenges demanding cooperation and collective action, and the pyramids thus become not just monuments to past achievement, but inspirations for future accomplishments, symbols of what humans can do when we work together toward shared goals. And in an age that often seems fractured and cynical, when cooperation feels difficult and grand projects seem impossible, there's something heartening about these ancient structures that required thousands of people working in coordination over decades to complete, demonstrating that humans are capable of sustained collective effort in service of goals that extend beyond immediate gratification or individual benefit. And while we need not literally build pyramids to learn from their example, we can draw inspiration from the fact that they exist, that people once devoted themselves to creating something meant to last forever and largely succeeded, building monuments that have endured longer than most civilizations, longer than most languages, longer than most religions, standing as testament to the human capacity for vision, determination, persistence, and the willingness to work toward goals that we ourselves may never see completed, trusting that the effort is worthwhile, that the goal matters, that what we build today can serve purposes tomorrow, purposes we may not fully foresee, but which will justify the investment we make. And it is this future orientation, this willingness to build for generations yet unborn, that the pyramids most powerfully embody. And perhaps this is their greatest lesson for our own time, when short-term thinking often dominates, and when we struggle to make investments whose payoffs lie beyond the next election cycle. Our quarterly report, reminding us that truly significant achievements require patience, vision, and the courage to undertake projects whose benefits we may never personally enjoy, but which will enrich the lives of those who come after. And in this sense, the pyramids are not just monuments to dead kings, but monuments to a fundamentally human impulse, the desire to transcend our individual mortality through creation, through building, through leaving something behind that will outlast us and speak to future generations about who we were and what we valued and what we were capable of achieving. When we set our minds to it and committed ourselves fully to the task, and as long as the pyramids stand, they will continue to serve this function, inspiring, challenging, provoking thought, generating wonder, and reminding every generation that encounters them that humans have always been builders, dreamers, achievers, capable of feats that seem impossible until they are accomplished, at which point they become not impossibilities, but achievements, not miracles, but monuments, not mysteries, but evidence of what we can do when vision, determination, and capability align. And the continuing quest to understand these monuments fully, to answer every question they pose, to unravel every mystery they present, is itself a testament to the enduring human curiosity that drives us to explore, to question, to seek understanding. Never content with surface appearances, but always probing deeper, looking closer, thinking harder, trying to grasp not just what was done, but how it was done and why it was, who's done, and what it meant to those who did it. And this quest for understanding is unending, for each answer generates new questions, each discovery reveals new puzzles, each solution opens new avenues of inquiry, and the pyramids, far from being exhausted subjects, continue to reward study and contemplation, offering insights not just into ancient Egypt, but into the human condition itself, into our capabilities and our limitations, our achievements and our failures, our dreams and our realities. And as we stand before them or study them from afar, using technologies their builders could never have imagined to peer inside stone structures meant to be forever sealed, we participate in a dialogue across time, asking questions of the past and sometimes receiving answers, though more often encountering only the profound silence of stone and sand. And yet, even that silence speaks, reminding us that time erases much, that most of what was is lost forever, that the traces that remain are precious and fragile and worthy of our most careful attention and our most profound respect, for they connect us to our shared human story, to the long arc of civilization, to the countless generations who came before us and made possible the world we inhabit. And the pyramids, standing at the beginning of that story, mark a moment when humans first achieved monumental scale, when we first built something truly permanent, when we first demonstrated that through organization, determination, and skill, we could reshape the landscape itself, creating artificial mountains that would dominate the desert for thousands of years. And though pyramid building itself was eventually abandoned, replaced by other architectural forms and other expressions of power and piety, the impulse it represented has never died, for we are still building, still creating, still trying to make our mark and leave our legacy. And the pyramids remind us that this has always been part of who we are. This drive to create something larger than ourselves, something that will endure, something that transforms vision into reality and makes permanent what we value most. And in contemplating them, we contemplate ourselves, our past, and our potential, what we have been and what we might become. And this contemplation, if we allow it to truly affect us, can be transformative, connecting us to something larger than our individual lives, to the sweep of human history and the community of human achievement across all times and places, making us part of a story that began long before we were born and will continue long after we are gone. A story of which the pyramids are crucial chapters, but not the whole book. For that book is still being written, each generation adding its own pages. And we too have our part to play, our own contributions to make, our own monuments to build, whether those are physical structures or intellectual achievements, artistic creations or social innovations. And the pyramids example reminds us that what seems impossible can become real, that visions can be realized, that humanity is capable of greatness when we commit ourselves to worthy goals and pursue them with dedication and skill. And this message, transmitted across 45 centuries of time, remains as relevant today as it was when the last stone was placed atop the Great Pyramid and the builders stood back to admire what they had created, knowing that they had accomplished something extraordinary, something that would outlast them by millennia, something that would make their civilization immortal even after the last person who spoke their language had died and the last temple dedicated to their gods had crumbled into dust, for the pyramids would remain silent witnesses to what humans once achieved, monuments that need no inscription to proclaim their builders' skill and vision, structures so impressive that their very existence is message enough, declaring to all who see them that here, on this desert plateau, beside the life-giving Nile, people once built something eternal, and in building it, became eternal themselves. Their names forgotten, but their achievement remembered. Their individual lives lost to history, but their collective accomplishment preserved in stone. And we who live in an age of impermanence, when so much seems temporary and disposable, when buildings are torn down after decades rather than standing for millennia, when knowledge is stored in formats that may become unreadable within our lifetimes, when so little seems built to last, we can look to the pyramids and remember that permanence is possible, that humans can create things that endure, that our works need not be ephemeral if we choose to build for the ages rather than for the moment. And while we may not need or want to build pyramids, the principle they embody remains valid, that what we make with care and skill and vision can outlast us, can serve purposes we never dreamed of, can inspire and instruct and move people we will never meet, people living in times we cannot imagine, and this possibility, this potential for transcendence through creation, is perhaps the pyramids' greatest gift to us, their most profound message, more important than any specific technical detail or historical fact, for it speaks to something fundamental about human nature and human potential, our ability to imagine a future we will not see and to work toward its realization nonetheless, building not for ourselves alone, but for all who will come after, and in doing so, achieving a form of immortality that no individual can attain, but that humanity as a whole can aspire to, creating works that outlast their creators and stand as testimony to what we once were and what we might be again. And so the story of the pyramids continues, unfolding still after 4,500 years, each generation discovering something new, each visitor experiencing their own moment of awe and wonder, each researcher adding another piece to the vast puzzle of understanding. And the pyramids themselves remain silent and patient, weathering the centuries as they have weathered so many already, enduring through the rise and fall of empires, through the transformation of languages and religions and entire civilizations, through all the changes that have swept across the human world since they were built, and they will likely endure. For centuries more, perhaps for millennia if we take proper care of them, standing as links between our present and that distant past, when they were new and gleaming white, when pharaohs strode through their temples and priests performed rituals we can only dimly reconstruct, when workers hauled stones and masons fitted blocks and engineers solved problems that still challenge us to understand. And in every age, the pyramids have meant something different, have served different purposes, have answered different needs, from tombs to temples to treasuries to tourist attractions to scientific puzzles to symbols of national pride. And they have been all these things and more, accommodating every interpretation, even as they resist final explanation. And this protean quality, this ability to mean many things to many people, is part of their enduring power, part of why they continue to fascinate and inspire long after the civilization that created them has passed into history, and we who study them or visit them or simply contemplate them from afar are heirs to a long tradition of pyramid wonder, joining ranks with Greek historians and Roman tourists and Arab scholars and European adventurers and Egyptian archaeologists and countless others who have looked upon these monuments and marveled. And our own contributions to this tradition, whether through scientific research or artistic response or philosophical reflection, add to the accumulating layers of meaning that surround the pyramids, making them richer and more complex with each passing generation. And yet, beneath all these ACC created meanings, beneath all our interpretations and speculations and theories, the pyramids themselves remain essentially unchanged, silent witnesses to their own creation, embodiments of ancient vision and skill, monuments that need no explanation because their mere existence is eloquent testimony to human capability and ambition. And perhaps this is as it should be. Perhaps the gap between what we can know and what remains mysterious is necessary, maintaining the pyramid's power to provoke wonder and stimulate thought. For if we understood everything, if every question were answered and every mystery solved, would they still move us as they do? Would they still capture imagination and inspire contemplation? Or would they become merely historical artifacts, interesting but no longer compelling, objects of study but not of wonder? And it is precisely their incompleteness, their resistance to final explanation, that keeps them vital and relevant, that ensures each generation will find in them something worth studying, something worth thinking about, something worth preserving for future generations who will bring their own questions and their own perspectives and their own technologies to bear on these ancient monuments. And so the dialogue continues across time and space and culture, between past and present, between the builders and the studied, between those who created these monuments and those who seek to understand them. And this dialogue, conducted through stone and scholarship, through excavation and interpretation, through measurement and speculation, is itself a testament to human curiosity and human persistence, to our refusal to accept that some things are simply unknowable, to our determination to push back the boundaries of ignorance and uncertainty, even when the subjects of our inquiry have been dead for thousands of years and left us only the most fragmentary evidence of their lives and thoughts and beliefs. And yet we persist, asking questions, gathering data, formulating hypotheses, testing theories, revising our understanding as new evidence emerges. And in this way, the pyramids continue to teach us, not just about ancient Egypt, but about ourselves, about how we pursue knowledge, how we construct understanding, how we preserve and transmit what we learn, and about the value we place on connection to the past, on understanding where we came from and how we got here. For the pyramids are part of our collective human heritage, monuments created by people who were different from us in many ways, but fundamentally the same in their humanity. And recognizing this common humanity across vast gulfs of time and culture can be humbling and inspiring in equal measure, reminding us of our smallness in the face of deep history, while also affirming our membership in a community that spans all times and places. And the pyramids, standing at the threshold of recorded history, mark a point where prehistory becomes history, where the archaeological record begins to be supplemented by written texts, where we can start to know not just what people did, but what they thought they were doing and why, though even with these texts, our understanding G remains partial and provisional, subject to revision as we learn more and as our interpretive frameworks evolve. And this provisionality is not weakness, but strength, for it keeps us humble and open to new possibilities, prevents us from becoming dogmatic or complacent, ensures that the study of the pyramids remains a living discipline rather than a closed body of settled knowledge. And as we look forward to the future of pyramid research, we can anticipate continued discoveries, both in the field as new excavations reveal additional details about the monuments and their contexts, and in the laboratory as improving analytical techniques allow us to extract more information from materials that have already been collected but could not previously be fully analyzed. And we can expect that technologies we cannot yet imagine will be brought to bear on these ancient structures, revealing features and relationships that current methods cannot detect. And each of these advances will add to our understanding while also generating new questions, new puzzles, new avenues of inquiry, ensuring that the pyramids will remain subjects of active research for as long as humans care about their past and have the means to investigate it. And this longevity, this ability to remain relevant and compelling across millennia, is perhaps the pyramids' greatest achievement. For they have succeeded not just in surviving the ravages of time, but in maintaining their grip on human imagination, inspiring countless generations to wonder and question and seek to understand. And as long as that continues, as long as people look upon the pyramids and feel moved to know more about them, about who built them and how and why, then those ancient builders' hopes for immortality will have been fulfilled, not in the way they perhaps intended, not through the eternal life of the pharaoh in the company of the gods, but through the endless fascination of the monuments themselves, which keep alive the memory of ancient Egypt and its people, ensuring that we will never forget that there was once a civilization along the Nile that achieved greatness, that built on a scale and with a precision that still commands respect, that organized society in ways that allowed the accomplishment of extraordinary feats, and that left behind monuments which, after 45 centuries, still dominate the landscape and still inspire those who see them to reflect on the nature of human achievement and the possibilities of human cooperation in service of grand visions. And in this way, the pyramids continue to fulfill their purpose, though not exactly as their builders imagined, for they do indeed connect us to something eternal, not to the gods perhaps, but to the enduring human spirit, to our capacity for vision and our determination to realize that vision in stone and sweat and skill, creating something that will outlast us and speak to future generations in a language that transcends words, the language of monumental form and carefully fitted stone and orientation to the stars. And as we conclude this meditation on the pyramids and their discoveries, we recognize that this is not truly a conclusion at AL. L, for the story continues, the research goes on, the discoveries keep coming, the interpretations evolve, and the pyramids themselves stand patient and enduring, waiting for the next visitor, the next researcher, the next generation, to approach them with fresh eyes and new questions, and they will be there, as they have been for so long, as they will likely be for ages yet to come, monuments to what humans once achieved and symbols of what we might achieve again, if we can match the vision, determination, and skill of those ancient builders who, working with simple tools but guided by sophisticated understanding, created something that has outlasted empires and religions and languages, creating something truly eternal, or as close to eternal as humans have ever come. And in doing so, they gave us a gift that keeps giving, a monument that continues to teach and inspire, to puzzle and provoke, to humble and uplift, reminding us of our deep connection to the human past and our potential for creating futures worth building toward. And for all these reasons and more, the pyramids of Egypt remain among humanity's greatest achievements, worthy of our study, our preservation, our wonder, and our gratitude. For they show us what we were capable of at the dawn of civilization, and they hint at what we might be capable of still if we can muster the same vision, the same determination, the same willingness to undertake great projects in service of goals that transcend our individual lives. And that is perhaps their ultimate message, their final gift to all who contemplate them. A reminder that we are part of something larger than ourselves, something that began long before us and will continue long after we are gone, but that we can contribute to while we are here, leaving our own marks, building our own monuments, whether of stone or of knowledge, of art or of achievement, adding our verses to the long poem of human civilization, of which the pyramids are among the most eloquent and enduring stanzas, speaking to us across 45 centuries with undiminished power, inspiring us still, challenging us still, reminding us still of what humans can do when we set our minds to it and refuse to be daunted by the magnitude of the task or the length of time it will require. For the pyramid builders knew that they were building for eternity. And eternity, as it turns out, was not too long to wait for their work to be appreciated and their genius to be recognized. And as we stand at the end of this long exploration of their achievements and the ongoing discoveries that continue to illuminate their methods and meanings, we can only express gratitude for what they left us, wonder at what they accomplished, and determination to preserve their legacy for future generations who will bring their own perspectives and their own technologies to the eternal questions that the pyramids pose. And so the story continues. Without end, a testament to human achievement that will endure as long as the monuments themselves, as long as humans exist to wonder at them, as long as we retain the capacity to be amazed by what our ancestors achieved and inspired to attempt our own great works, building not pyramids perhaps, but creating nonetheless, contributing to the ongoing story of human civilization, adding our own chapters to the long book of human achievement, of which the pyramids of Egypt remain among the most remarkable and enduring pages, written in stone and time and vision, and read by every generation that has come after, each finding in them something different, but all finding something worth contemplating, something worth preserving, something worth passing on. And that is the true immortality that the pyramid builders achieved, not through the preservation of their bodies or the continuation of their cults, but through the creation of monuments that continue to speak to us, to challenge us, to inspire us. 45 centuries after the last stone was set in place and the scaffolding was removed and the casing stones gleamed white in the Egyptian sun, and the builders stood back to admire what they had wrought and knew that they had created something that would endure, something that would outlast them, something that would carry their civilization's message forward through time. And they were right, for here we are, millennia later, still studying their work, still marveling at their achievement, still trying to understand how they did it and why they did it and what it meant to them, and still finding in the pyramids lessons about human capability and human vision that remain relevant to our own time and our own challenges. And so the pyramids endure, and so their story continues, and so we who study them or visit them or simply think Abu, don't them become part of that story. heirs to a tradition of pyramid wonder that stretches back through the centuries and will continue into the future as long as these monuments stand and humans retain the capacity to wonder at them. And that is as it should be, for the pyramids were built to last forever. And while forever is a very long time, longer than any human creation can truly expect to endure, the pyramids have made a better run at it than almost anything else humans have ever built. And they stand today, weathered but still magnificent, damaged but still impressive, mysterious but still comprehensible, monuments to what we were and what we might be. Again, if we can summon the vision and the will and the determination to build greatly, to create lasting works, to contribute to the ongoing human story in ways that will outlast our individual lives and speak to future generations about who we were and what we valued and what we were capable of achieving when we set ourselves to the task and refused to be daunted by the magnitude of what we were attempting. And the pyramids tell us that such achievements are possible, that humans have done it before and can do it again, and that message, transmitted across 45 centuries, remains as fresh and as relevant and as inspiring today as it was when these monuments first rose from the desert sands, dominating the landscape, declaring to all who saw them that here humans had accomplished something extraordinary, something that would endure, something that would make its builders immortal. And so it has. And so the pyramids remain silent and patient and eternal, witnesses to what was and heralds of what might be, monuments to human achievement that continue to inspire and to teach and to remind us of our shared humanity and our common capacity for greatness, if only we can find the vision to see it and the will to pursue it and the determination to see it through to completion, building not for ourselves alone, but for all who will come after, creating works that will outlast us and carry forward our values and our achievements and our hopes for a future worthy of the past that gave us life. And the pyramids, standing at the dawn of recorded history, remind us that this has always been possible, that humans have always been capable of such achievements, and that we honor their memory and their legacy not by simply admiring what they built, but by building our own great works, making our own contributions, adding our own verses to the long poem of human civilization, and ensuring that when we are gone, we too will have left something behind worth preserving, worth studying, worth contemplating, and worth passing on to future generations who will look back on our time as we look back on the age of the pyramid builders and wonder at what we achieved, and draw inspiration from our example and carry forward the endless human project of building, creating, achieving, and leaving our mark on the world in ways that transcend our individual mortality and contribute to the collective immortality of human civilization itself. And that, finally, is what the pyramids teach us, that through our works we see and achieve a form of eternal life, that what we create with care and skill and vision can outlast us by millennia, and that the greatest human achievements are those that serve not just our own interests, but the interests of generations yet unborn. Building not for ourselves alone, but for all who will come after. And in doing so, becoming part of something larger than ourselves, something that transcends individual life and links us to the long chain of human achievement that stretches back to the pyramid builders and forward into a future we can only dimly imagine, but to which we can contribute through our works and our creations and our determination to build greatly and build well and build for the ages, creating monuments of whatever kind that will endure and inspire and teach, just as the pyramids have endured and inspired and taught for 45 centuries and will, if we preserve them properly, continue to do so for centuries and millennia to come, standing as eternal witnesses to what humans can achieve, when vision and determination and skill combine to create something truly extraordinary, something that defies time and transcends mortality, something that makes its creators immortal by preserving their achievement long after their names and their lives have been forgotten. And that is the ultimate gift of the pyramids. The final lesson they teach, that through creation we can defeat death, that through our works we can live forever, and that the greatest human achievements are those that serve purposes beyond our individual lives. Building toward futures we will not see, but which will be richer and more meaningful because of what we have contributed. And the pyramids, magnificent and mysterious and enduring, remind us of this eternal truth. And in doing so, they fulfilled their purpose still. 45 centuries after they were built, monuments to human greatness that continue to inspire human greatness in all who contemplate them. And that is as it should be. And that is why they matter. And that is why they will continue to matter as long as humans exist to wonder at them and to draw inspiration from their example. And so we conclude this exploration of the pyramids and their discoveries with gratitude for what they teach us, wonder at what they represent, and determination to preserve them for future generations who will bring their own questions and their own perspectives to these eternal monuments, ensuring that the story continues, the dialogue persists, and the pyramids remain what they have always been: supreme examples of human achievement, testaments to what we can accomplish when we commit ourselves fully to worthy goals, and inspirations for all who see them to attempt their own great works and to build their own monuments and to contribute in their own ways to the endless human story of which the pyramids are among the most eloquent chapters, written in stone and time and preserved through the ages as evidence of what we were and what we might become again.